Good morning, Tracy, San Joaquin County and District 13 residents. I'm your host, Raj Singh, here today with my co-host, Kriti Jatwal, bringing a candidate running for state assembly. And before we start introducing her, I just want to give some time to Kriti to say a few words today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Raj. So before we start, we have deep condolences for Justice Ginsburg. So she left a legacy for this country and inspired the generations. Today we have the pleasure to meet Kathy Miller. So she is running for State Assembly for District 13. I appreciate her for giving us the opportunity to listen to her vision, her thoughts, what issues she thinks, and what kinds of solutions she wants to bring. So she is a local business owner. So she served the city council in Stockton as well. And since 2014, so she is serving as a county supervisor. So she is affiliated to many boards. So Delta Protection Commission for 2 years, San Joaquin Area Flood Control Agency for 8 years. So now I request Kathy to please let us know more about her.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here with you this morning. And first of all, I want to thank you and the Secretary Tracy for putting together these candidate conversations, especially in these times of COVID and social distancing and self-isolation. It's really important for voters to be able to hear directly from candidates and see with their own eyes how we communicate and help them make decisions for this very important election that's coming up in November. So thank you very much. You touched on a lot of the things that I've done. I have been serving in local government for the last 12 years, 6 on the Board of Supervisors, and before that, 6 years on the Stockton City Council. I have been a small business owner for over a decade. I also represented the downtown property and business owners for 5 years before I was ever elected to office. And I'm also a wife of, this week will be 43 years. My husband and I, we have 3 grown children, and I am a very proud grandmother of 5 these days. So I appreciate you doing this. I'm really interested in talking about the issues and communicating with voters. Really, my campaign, we focused on education, healthcare, water, public safety, and homelessness. And as a county supervisor this year, and I'm also the chair of the board this year, the county has been responsible for coordinating the efforts to deal with and hopefully defeat this pandemic in San Joaquin County. So I think today it probably will be a really good thing for us to share with the voters some of the things that the county has been doing and the priorities we've been setting during this pandemic.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. And it's our honor as well that we're sharing some thoughts this morning with you. So not taking much more time, let's jump into our first segment of our show. And as you said, you talked about a couple of the core pillars. And before jumping into that, I think the first thing I would want to hear from you, and our audience would like to hear from you about the COVID. If you get elected as assembly member, what are some thoughts or what are some approaches you think or challenges that you've been hearing from the residents or from your district or overall San Joaquin County that you will be working on?
Well, first of all, I don't think the impacts from COVID are going away anytime soon. We are going to be dealing with them. There are going to be some very real and huge budget impacts, not just at the state level, but at every level of government. We are going to see our revenues. We haven't yet to a large extent, but we are expecting some major impacts to our revenues, both in the form of property taxes and sales taxes. At the same time, we're going to have increased needs. And so it's going to be really important for the state to prioritize state dollar investments. I think my experience on the Stockton City Council in the lead up and during the bankruptcy are going to really be important to have that voice represented at the state level. it is very easy to be an elected official when times are good and you get to say yes to everybody. There's so many great ideas and so many wonderful programs that you can fund and you can really make happen for your communities. But when times are very hard and there is not the money in the budget, it is very difficult to have to say no to a lot of excellent programs and a lot of wonderful people who have great ideas. The key is you have to be able to prioritize how you spend those dollars and not just focus on today, the immediate crisis. You have to be able to focus on what's going to get you and move you into a strong recovery. I am very proud that the hard decisions we made on the Stockton City Council, and there were many, I'm very proud that within 3 years of coming out of the largest municipal bankruptcy in the history of this nation at that time, that Stockton was rated one of the most fiscally healthy communities in the nation. That's because of making smart decisions and being able to prioritize.
Great. And just to kind of more, a little bit get more into the COVID. So with this COVID as a global pandemic, it's impacting a lot of small businesses and the other businesses as well overall. However, like you talked about the recovery of that. So can you a little bit highlight more on that part, that how are we getting prepared when we're coming out of the COVID side as a recovery plan?
Well, one of the things that we've done at the county was we set aside $15 million of our federal CARES Act dollars, which are restricted to reimbursing for COVID expenses. But we set aside $15 million of those dollars specifically for our small businesses in San Joaquin County. And we made them available in the form of a grant. This is not a loan that a small business has to pay back. This is the ability to submit your expenses that came upon your business due to COVID and get them reimbursed. And we're continuing with those grants. We have since expanded the program to incorporate slightly larger businesses from 50 to 500 employees. We've also allocated some of those dollars now to help reimburse our hospitals throughout our county. And we've really tried to focus on keeping our businesses afloat, because it's going to be tough. And at the state level, we're going to need to looking at more of these types of programs to help fund our small businesses to get back on their feet. And one of the ways the state can do some of these things is by streamlining some of the processes, removing some of the more onerous restrictions on our small businesses, and really providing flexibility to our local governments who know their local businesses best. Give them the flexibility to apply those state dollars in the way that will benefit their communities the most.
Thank you for highlighting on that. One more related to this. Actually, about a week or two ago, I was talking to one of my friends who has a small business, and he was discussing with me that is there anything that our government is enforcing to help the people that are leasing the places, because they have contracts with their owners, like property owners, that you have to pay this amount by this date. But because of COVID, they are not able to do break even. So, but that their every month's lease is coming, and if they're not able to pay, they have already in place some of late fees or some percentage needs to be added. Is there something we're looking into towards that to kind of enforce that, hey, maybe for this amount of period, there shouldn't be any late fees, or there should be, government should step in to work between two? I mean, it's obviously it's a private owner versus the person who's renting it. But as this overall global pandemic, I think the government or some agency needs to step in to help each other out. So any thoughts or any vision on that?
Well, it's important to remember that if you only focus on the end user of a property, the renter, you don't take into consideration that it's actually a part of a whole system. And so if renters are not contributing anything toward their rent, then the landlords, they have obligations that are due, whether it's to a lender or it's to a larger property owner that they're leasing space from. So you have to look at it as a system, and you have to make sure that you're providing relief in the entire system. Now, one of the things through this small grant program that I mentioned, rent is something that a small business owner can submit for as reimbursement. Their revenues, and they have been impacted, had to close, and they have been unable to pay that rent, they can submit for a grant to the county. That type of program, I think, is something that's important, because it not only supports the small business, it supports their landlords, and it supports the lenders further upstream. And that's important to keep in mind, because the last thing we want is a bunch of foreclosures if landlords go out of business, and then our small businesses end up getting evicted because the property has turned over. That doesn't benefit anyone. It certainly doesn't benefit our small business owners, and it doesn't benefit our communities who depend on these services and these businesses.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the insight about it and more detail as on this. I think this is a huge topic and a lot of moving pieces in there. So thank you so much. And now I will hand over to Gurtej so to get us keep going to the next part of our discussion.
Thank you very much, Kathy, because COVID, it has multiple stakeholders involved. One of the biggest stakeholders are our students. So as we are remembering Justice Ginsburg today, so the main legacy she has, the education. With education, with knowledge, you can achieve anything. You can bridge all the barriers, you can cover all the gaps. So from that perspective, our Delta colleges in Stockton, 25,000 students on daily basis, they get valued from Delta College. Our school systems, around thousands of students, they go to schools every day on the daily basis in District 13. So what do you think, so where we are from the education perspective right now, and what would be your point of view for future of our education in District 13?
Well, one of the things the board has been very aware of is the negative impacts of our schools being closed on our students of all ages, but especially our youngest students. And so it's important to remember that no matter what counties, what orders we pass, we cannot be more lenient than the state's orders. We must abide by the state public health orders. San Joaquin County has a high number of both cases per the percentage of our population, as well as the number of people who are testing positive. And so we are in the most at-risk tier right now. That being said, the metrics for reopening schools, to approving a waiver to allow for the schools to create a safety protocol to demonstrate how they will keep their students and their staff safe, that metric is a little bit lower than the metric for reopening a lot of other businesses. That metric we have met, and our public health officer, as of this last week, had already approved 17 private school waivers, a couple of smaller public schools, but everybody needs to remember that with the public schools, they have their own governing boards and their own superintendents who make those decisions for their own students. So as much as everybody would like to think that the board can simply wave a magic wand and send all our students back to school, we do not have that power. And it's important to remember that each school needs to craft their own safety plan, their own reopening plan, to make sure that they address the concerns and the needs of their parents, their students, and they're able to do it safely. I have had a huge priority on education since my earliest days in elected office. I am very aware of how transformative education is. My husband is the first in his family to graduate from college. He drove a forklift in a potato warehouse at night so that he could go to a state college during the day. I returned to a community college as a young mother of 3 very young children to get the skills that I needed to own and operate my own business. And those investments in education made all the difference for our family. So I'm very aware of how important education is to all ages of students. So I've been working for the last 7 years with the San Joaquin Children's Alliance, which is an alliance of advocates for children from early childhood education to even preschool from 0 to 3 years old, all the way up through all of our educational partners, including University of the Pacific, our CSU satellite campus in San Joaquin County, all of us as partners, trying to craft some programs that would really move the needle on literacy and outcomes for our students, and also develop a sustainable funding scheme that will backfill those tobacco tax dollars, which we've seen diminishing as the impacts of that positive public education is now being seen with so many people no longer smoking and using tobacco products. That tax has diminished greatly. And so we have been working hard to identify and develop a new funding stream. There will be a ballot measure again in November. It'll be Measure X that will provide a business tax on cannabis businesses in the unincorporated area. It will only be paid for by those businesses, the same way all the other businesses pay their fair share toward our community. And 50% of those dollars, that's the largest amount ever, 50% of those dollars will be dedicated to programming for children and youth.
Thank you very much, Kathy. So just a follow-up on that. So you mentioned about the satellite campuses that we have in San Joaquin County, and you are a strong proponent of education. So as many people from across the Bay Area and all those places, they are moving into San Joaquin County, and the students here, they are very much encouraged by their parents and everybody to have good education. So most of the times they have to move away from the San Joaquin County, maybe to San Jose or to Sacramento, to find the courses that are being offered which will help them in their following career. So those students go there and they never come back. So what do you think? So right now the position in San Joaquin County is, and how do you see the future so that we can retain those students, we can provide them with the education that they need, as well as that will encourage the companies to come to the San Joaquin County? So what are your thoughts?
Well, I myself am a victim of this exact thing that you've mentioned. We refer to it as our brain drain in San Joaquin County. All 3 of my children went to public universities, left here because they couldn't do it here locally, and none of them returned to San Joaquin County. And as a grandmother, that is something that causes me great pain, that my grandchildren are not here close to me. So I understand how parents feel about that. I've been a very strong proponent from the very beginning of Assemblymember Eggman's efforts to make sure that the next public university constructed is constructed here in San Joaquin County. Stockton is the largest metropolitan area in this state, whose residents must travel more than 50 miles to have access to a 4-year public education. Now, I realize that for students in Tracy, that still means somewhat of a commute, but it is far less problematic in terms of traffic because it's a reverse commute from Tracy to Stockton, and it is a far shorter distance than where Tracy students need to travel to now, and it can actually make the difference. I also think our state needs to recommit to funding of our community college system. When I was in high school, community college in the state of California, I think it was a $50 annual fee. It was essentially free. And if you graduated from a public school in this state, you were guaranteed that extra 2 years of higher education, which for a lot of students who maybe were behind in high school, that gave you that extra 2 years to catch up. And a lot of students who are perhaps a little more either economically challenged, had to work during high school, or didn't have the same benefits, or simply were perhaps a little more intellectually immature at that age, or started school younger. It gave you an opportunity to catch up and then do those last 2 years at a 4-year institution. And it really kept a lot of people in school and continuing to get a 4-year degree, which then increased their earning capacity for the rest of their lives and provided much higher standard of living for their families. And for many people, it kept them in their local communities, and it kept them in California. So those are all solid investments that our state needs to be making in terms of early childhood education for preschool, so that all our students start kindergarten ready to learn. Make sure that all of our third graders can read at grade level by third grade, because that's the key indicator of long-term educational success. And then providing the funding for a good, solid public education all the way through our community college system and our CSU campuses and our UCs for those students that can qualify for those. So those are the smartest investments we can make. Investing in our future like that, that is the best investment we can make with our public dollars.
Just follow-up part on the educational side. So we talked about Delta College, we talked about CSU. I think what's more important is to touch on the part, how are we keeping our residents in our cities? Because a lot of folks are driving, just not only in Tracy, but overall, if we talk about all the way from Merced, all the way from Lodi side, there are a lot of folks travel in the morning from 4 a.m. to all the way to 9 a.m. to over the Altamont Pass. So when we talk about on the educational side or the job market side, talking about the Bay Area having a IT hub there. If those company needs to come here, the first challenge that we hear is that there's no workforce in the pipeline. What it really defines when I talk to different folks, I heard different things. Okay, when you say there's not enough workforce in the pipeline, what does it mean? What does it mean from their point of view is that we have people buying houses here from Bay Area, they're living here. That's the workforce. But for the companies to invest and open up their the offices here, that is not enough for them, because they cannot just rely on temporary people. You can move out tomorrow, or something happens, this person move out of Tracy back to San Jose or something. They need stable pipeline that's coming directly from the universities. So when we're talking about that, how do you see in the future for our district? Because if I read probably a month ago, I read the news, there were talks about CSU being opened in Stockton, but I think there's some challenges with that as well. So overall, can you highlight on us and all the audience on that part?
It is going to be a challenge. I mean, the efforts to bring a public four-year university, whether it's a CSU or a Cal Poly, doesn't matter which one, that's a long-term effort. Even before COVID, we were probably looking at a decade of focused work, both in Sacramento and locally, to build that pipeline, demonstrate that we have the students in a critical mass graduating from our high schools, prepared to enter a four-year school. We've been working really hard developing these partnerships with Delta College, so that if you come through Delta College, you're guaranteed admission into CSU Stanislaus. We need to convince the state to give us more slots, more student positions in our satellite CSU so that we can demonstrate, we can fill them. And the budget hit on COVID. I mean, the report that came out on the CSU clearly said Stockton has the population base. We also have a large area that we would draw from of students on the edges of that district that are currently commuting up to Sacramento State or commuting into the East Bay or down to Turlock. A percentage of those students would commute the other direction, and they would go into the center of the county. So bringing a CSU here is not just critical for our education, it's critical for our long-term economic development of San Joaquin County and this whole region. Because there are students from the foothills as well, from Calaveras and Amador counties, which do not have access to a four-year public school, who would come down the hill into San Joaquin County. And so I think it's one of the reasons why Assemblymember Eggman actually recruited me to run for her seat when she was deciding whether or not to run for the Senate, because she knew that I felt so strongly about this, that I really was willing to work toward it, and that I would continue the work even after she turns out of her time in Sacramento. And so I think it is really important to have someone that has that history, that understands how this public university would really transform our region. I mean, it would be an absolute game changer. I mean, when you think about not just the students, you think about all the jobs that it creates at a university, then you think about all of the peripheral things that are attached to universities. You think of the research facilities, you think of the medical facilities that locate here because there is access to students who are training in healthcare programs. All of those things, that's how we're going to get that critical mass that is going to get employers who bring good paying, professional jobs to this region. That's how we're going to do it. And so it's going to be a long-term effort. We need somebody that is very passionate about it. And it takes more than just saying, oh yeah, I support that. You have to understand how you have to work with the people in Sacramento. And you have to have those close connections into the business community here. You need to understand how the partnership fits in, how the business council fits in, how the various chambers of commerce fit in to this equation. And you have to have those established relationships and that trust built up so you can bring everybody to the table and we're all working toward the same goal.
Thank you, Kathy. And the last, do you mind sharing your contact information if anybody would have a follow-up question or they wanted to clarify something with you? And we always encourage our voters or and the audience that if they do have, they can let us know and we can convey or send their message and share with you. But I think it'll be better if you give them something directly that they can go to your website or your Facebook page or any email address. Please do so.
My email is Kathy with a K at electkathymiller.com. We have a Facebook page, which is Kathy Miller for Assembly District 13. Any of those places, feel free to direct comments or concerns. I personally answer them, and so they will hear from me, and I welcome that interaction with the voters of San Joaquin County. And again, thank you so much for doing these conversations. I think they're just incredibly positive, and I think all of us should be very grateful for this work. You've taken your personal time to do this, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy.